Nicole Auerbach, Jordan Cornette here, and what an NCAA tournament it has been. The dust has settled. 4 teams headed to San Antonio, and it is very chalky. The 1 seeds advance on in Auburn, Florida, Duke, and Houston. And Nicole, my basketball Buddha, you did say this thing was going to be chalky coming in, and here we are, chalk of the highest order. Your thoughts, and congratulations on being right.
Well, first of all, congratulations to all of the people that fill out a bracket and just pick the number 1 seeds. And you're usually their brackets bust. And this year it turns out that they are right. But it felt like it was one of those years where that was possible. I mean, you could talk yourself into being concerned about Auburn with the way that they kind of finished the regular season into the selection Sunday. You couldn't really talk yourself out of Duke unless you wanted to say, oh, their level of competition all year wasn't as strong as everybody else's. Houston was kind of flying under the radar. I think people just kind of put them in a different category. They were like, they're very good defensively. They're better offensively, but they just weren't like a sexy pick. People weren't talking about them. And then Florida, red hot coming out of the SEC tournament. So I think it made sense that these were the 4 teams that were heavily favored. And no matter what the paths, right? Some of them had the toughest possible seed line. Some of them had really challenging draws based on KenPom ratings of their opponents. But these were the best teams in the country all year. I mean, and I think for the most part, you could even say Auburn and Duke for much of the regular season were the 2 best teams in the country. And that was a lot of the conversation. So not terribly shocked that we got it, although it is much harder than people think to get a Final Four with all 4 number 1 seeds. It's only happened once before, also in San Antonio. So not shocked. But I think that it is fitting for this year where it did feel like there were tiers of teams and this was the top tier.
Yeah, Nicole, I don't think anybody would say shocked, most especially because of the path from the 4 teams, right? A complete team, so it should really be no surprise. I mean, you got great coaching in all 4 teams. Some coaches longer in the tooth than others, historic Hall of Fame type resumes, a guy like Coach Kelvin Sampson, obviously Coach Bruce Pearl. Then you've got 2 younger coaches in Coach Shire and Coach Golden that have done magnificent jobs. You've got star power in all 4 teams, but it's not just a star to ride the back of to get you there. These teams are complete teams. They have a depth. They have an identity. They're really good on both sides of the basketball. They have high-level athleticism. To me, questions have been answered about these teams. One of the biggest questions, and we'll talk a little bit about them here in a little bit, but Duke, coming from a conference that had a historically down year in the ACC, and they hadn't really been challenged, Nicole. So people said, what's going to happen with game pressure? Well, they answered that question by avoiding that game pressure with how they handle inflection points. This team is so good when they're challenged, they then distance themselves. So I was marveling at the level of play from these 1 seeds. Florida being able to do the job late to get in speaks to their resiliency, but I think we're poised for one of the best Final Fours of all time. That's not hyperbole on my end.
No, it's not. These are 4 of the most offensive and defensive efficient teams ever in the KenPom era. Like from the beginning of 1996 to now, they're all in that category of some of the best teams ever on both sides of the ball. So you are expecting great games. As you mentioned, great stars. So you have the 2 players that have won the National Player of the Year awards in Cooper Flagg and Janai Broome. You have Walter Clayton Jr., who looks like the best player on the court a lot of the time when he's playing. And he's been one of the most clutch players in the tournament to date. So I'm with you. I think there's really high expectations for the games, for the Final 4 games. Now that we have endured so much chalk for all of these other rounds, I think you're hoping that it sets up masterpieces of final games in San Antonio.
Yeah, and you got powerhouse fan bases, so people are going to travel down there to San Antonio. To me, and we've had this conversation leading up, and it's worth reiterating now, is this is great for the college basketball game. You know, the women's side's been on a rocket ship. They're in a great place. The men's game is kind of trying to figure out what it is right now, and it doesn't help with this transfer portal, the NIL, and all the money floating around. You want to see your season crowning the best champion with the best version of basketball in the late stages. And the beauty of it is we're going to get that in Auburn, Florida, Duke, and Houston. This is putting on display and the biggest stage when the casuals join the rest of us who've been covering this sport and go, oh, wow, there's still a ton of cohesion, connectivity, high-level basketball to boast. And I think that's very important in this time right now to get out there and see the 3 best games still left in what has been a late season. So I'm very excited for this. Great reason to be with all 4 number 1 seeds advancing for the first time since 2008. Let's move along to one of those teams remaining in the 4. The Duke Blue Devils, incredibly polarizing, very dominant, as we mentioned just before.
Hold on. Are they as polarizing this year? Don't you feel like they are a more likable team and program in general since Coach K is gone? Like, how do you not root for what John Shire is doing, the guy after the guy who's considered the GOAT in college basketball, to take a team to the Final Four in year 3? He's a really likable guy. Like, you and I talk about how much we like him and how we followed his entire career and got to know him as a young coach. Like, to me, this is a different Duke team where I feel like my entire social media field is like, why don't I hate him? Why don't I hate Duke? I'm used to hating Duke. Maybe they're not as polarizing.
There's a certain team that you spent the fall covering at the NBC desk that they have shades of.
I think so.
Notre Dame football and obviously what Coach Marcus Freeman's done there. And yeah, I agree with you. The polarization has worn off because collectively everybody's like, these guys are easy to root for. A mega star in Cooper Flagg. I had a chance to talk to him and spend time with him in Newark. Very easy to root for, very composed, mature beyond his years. I've known John for decades now. It's fun to see him the ripe age of 37 getting to his first Final Four, taking over for an icon in Coach K is no easy task. And here he is. But, back to that great point you made about them and the Duke hate not really being there. I even asked Coach John Shire about it in Newark. And I said, how does it feel to coach for a program that people either really love you or they kind of hate you? And he goes, I don't really hear that noise much anymore. He's like, maybe I'm so far past it from my playing days that edge is worn off. It's not noise anymore. So you're right. Maybe that is a thing of the past. But one thing that is certainly a thing of the present is they're dominant. Is it Duke versus the field, Nicole?
I think it is. After you watch these teams, it feels like that team is a cut above the rest.
Yeah.
What they were able to do to an Alabama team that can just destroy you with a 3-ball, with any offensive scoring, right? They're coming off a game where they scored over 100 points and your defense clamps down on them so much. I think that was just a statement made about that end of the floor because we already talk about Cooper Flagg. We already talk about the way that this team scores, how hard they are to stop, how talented they are. But they are a little bit underrated defensively. And obviously, Ken Pom would tell you that both sides of the ball are really, really good for this team. But I think watching it in action against an Alabama team that we have seen just light it up against some of the other very good teams in college basketball was a different level. And to your point earlier, they did not struggle. They didn't barely broke a sweat to get to the Final Four. All the other top teams at least were tested. But they just feel a little bit, I'm not going to say like UConn last year entirely, where that might have been like an all-time great college basketball team, but they really weren't tested en route to winning a national championship. I would not be shocked, as much as I want these games to be great in San Antonio, if it turns out that Duke was a cut above the rest and is able to win convincingly. I will say Houston is a team that does not get blown out easily. They have not lost by more than 5 points all season. 3 of their losses were in overtime. So maybe, that the idea of them coasting is going to be put to the test here against another great defensive team that can shoot better than we're used to seeing Houston teams. But man, I'm in love with the Duke team. I think they're just so good, so talented. Every time I watch them, I think that's the best team in college basketball.
Yeah, you know what is interesting, Nicole, is the conversation's already starting prematurely indeed. And whenever I hear it, is this Duke team one of the all-time great teams? I do believe Florida is a very dangerous threat to them because I watched Florida in the SEC championship. You know how I feel about them. As for Duke and Houston and that matchup for Duke to even get to a title game, that's going to be incredibly physical. And people say, well, yeah, of course, because it's Houston. Well, no, because it's Duke as well. And I was on hand. I was front row right there doing the radio side of the broadcast, watching Duke. And what stood out to me with this Duke team is they're big, they're long, and they are physical. And physical in spots that you don't typically talk about. Cooper Flagg as a wing is wildly physical. Con Knipple as a guard is stout, uses his body, has that big posterior, and gets it into guys to create space, plays with an intensity. If Con Knipple didn't play with Cooper Flagg, Con Knipple would be the talk of college basketball. His shine gets dimmed just a little bit playing with a megastar like Cooper Flagg, but those guys together are a lot. And Malawatch down low. Come on, Malawatch.
Difference maker.
Total difference maker. I mean, look, he's not Zach Edey level, but he's not far off. At 7'2", how he moves, how he gets up and down the floor. I mean, the alley-oop option for them offensively is something that they attack often and are very successful with. You mentioned the efficiency on both sides of the ball. Duke is top 5 in offensive and defensive efficiency. This group just has counters. How they defended Mark Sears and took away the three. You heard Oates say this is what we tried to do, but then they did this, and then we tried to do this, but then there's another counter. This is an elite coach in Coach John Shire that is well above his years as a head coach. And for me, this Duke team is focused. The inflection points, that's all I talked about during the Newark run in the Sweet 16 and Elite Eight game. They don't get down to late game situations because at that inflection point of a game, they distance themselves. I liken it to a reference of being ahead of the sticks for a team offensively in football. That is truly what this Duke team is. So as I look at it, I think they're in great position. But Nicole, I really hope we get Florida and Duke. As for Florida, they're coming out of that SEC. And what's been a historic year for the SEC, 14 teams dancing, that's a record. Half of the Sweet 16 coming from the SEC. Wow. And now half of the Final Four. Great odds to potentially crown a champion. What a year it's been for this league.
Yeah, and they had a chance to get 4 teams into the Final Four, which is crazy to think about. They had them in all regions. Every time we talk about what the SEC has done in basketball, I like to go back to the very beginning because I remember when this happened. It was 2016. The SEC only sent 3 teams to the NCAA tournament. Greg Sankey, new on the job, brings in Mike Tranghese, who's Dave Gabbitt's right-hand man in the Big East. And he says, help. Like, we need to revamp men's basketball in this sport. So it was scheduling games against better competition. It was limiting, there was rules around non-conference scheduling. Everyone's opponent must have an RPI average of 175 or better, which just means you're not playing the worst of the worst in Division I just to boost your record and get some wins. So you had that element. They added, more weekly coverage on the SEC network to continue to boost and give exposure to their teams. Later games on television, stop complaining about them. These are showcase opportunities. Use football to help highlight basketball. There were so many pieces to this, which then led to, you had great coaches hired. You had more investment in the programs, retaining those great coaches. It was just all of these pieces that came into place that lead you to this point where the league's as deep as it is. But the question is, all of this has been great. Fantastic regular season, arguments about the best league in college basketball, record-setting numbers of teams in, record-setting amount of money coming in for NCAA tournaments, units, which are they're advancing in the tournament. But the question is, Jordan, do they need to win the title to validate all of that? Is there something that's missing if they don't after checking all of these other boxes?
I got to be honest. I think in terms of pressure, the most pressure is on these two teams in terms of representing your league, right? When you talk about the ACC, it's always Duke. It's always Carolina. So they're used to that. I don't think this is a driving force for these teams. They're not sitting in a locker room saying, we got to do this for our conference. But in terms of conference narratives, commissioners and people on the TV side representing these conferences, this is certainly a conversation. Look, Houston is in the Big 12. They've inserted themselves. They classed up, and they've been the class of the conference the last 2 years. There's still a new bird there, but so much conversation about the Big Ten and the 25-year drought, which now will become a 26-year drought with no Big Ten team in this thing. Look, it's not 25 years, but it's 11 years. That's pretty long for a prideful SEC. And you go back to that team, and it was Kentucky. And Kentucky, for a lot of SEC basketball, a lion's share of that history has come from that blue blood program. So for an opportunity for Bruce Pearl, who's now going to the Final Four for his second time, Todd Golden, first time for him. He's a rising star who's arrived representing Florida, and we know about their back-to-back championships. That was over 2 decades. That was 2006, 7. I mean, we're talking, 17, 18 years ago. So, yeah, absolutely. This needs to be capped with all this history they've achieved with the championship. Are the players in the locker room thinking about that? No. The coaches thinking about that? No. But as we talk about conference pride, let's not forget this incredible year. It's kind of going to be just a distant memory if you don't say, oh, yeah, the champion came from that SEC. And, oh, by the way, what a year from start to finish that conference had, Nicole.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree as well, because it's part of what the Big East has hung its hat on, right? Is okay, college sports are changing and we don't have football, but we are excellent at basketball. We've won all these titles, Villanova, UConn, we've got all these teams. that can win trophies, but also money. You're winning units for your league. And then the Big 12 has had this argument for years now about how strong the conference is relative to others. It's very hard to compare these leagues, especially once you get into league play. You don't have a ton of data points. So this stuff matters when you are thinking about the perceptions, how you're marketing your leagues, how this stuff works. And if we want to say the SEC is great at basketball now, which it is, you kind of want the trophy as well. You want them to be cutting down the nets, especially when you have 2 number 1 seeds and they get to the Final Four. And again, like you said, Auburn and Bruce Pearl has been one of the best coaches in college basketball for a long time. And then Todd Golden, as you said, rising star who has arrived and can win at this level. So I don't think there's added expectation or pressure because, of course, they want to win at this stage. And they're going to have challenging games to get there, including against each other. But I do think for the outside perception and some of the off-season conversation coming out of this season, it does matter.
Yeah, and look, it's a conference that's positioned nicely. We know about the athletic departments. We know about the collectives that are flush with money, that are very interested in helping their programs out to prop them up. That's no different than the Big Ten. And so the Big Ten, we should expect them year after year to be there. Obviously, it was what's been a good year for Big Ten basketball, but did not end up in a Final Four. But they'll be there continually. Can they get over the hump is a question. Something worth watching out for, and it's not necessarily an SEC conversation, but it's a conference conversation, is the Big East. You know, this $20 million this cap in which these athletic departments can operate with, there's no football in the Big East. So having that number and how they're able to distribute that to basketball should position the Big East very nicely moving forward in this new world. So I expect the Big East to have a bigger seat at the table. We know about the tradition there. You mentioned Mike Tranghese. We know what his impact was in that Big East. I think that's one to really monitor, and I do expect the Big Ten to keep on going. Something to think about there, too, is Tom Izzo and his future. We have that conversation every year as he continues to surge on. Did an incredible job, maybe his best one yet. How much more does he have left in the tank?
Yeah, lots more to talk about, Jordan. I think we should do that after we dissect these, hopefully 3 great games in San Antonio.
I'm not going to let you leave without picking a champion. I think I know where you're going, given our conversation here. Who do you like to cut down the nets in San Antonio, Nicole?
So I think we might agree because I'm thinking it's going to be a Duke-Florida national championship matchup, and the Blue Devils are cutting down the nets. I've been beyond impressed by what Jon Scheyer has done in year 3, following a legend. There were so many people for years. Everyone wondered who was going to follow Coach K at Duke. And then the second part of that conversation was, I want to be the guy after the guy after the guy, right? Like, you don't want to be the first to do it. And he has just done such a masterful job recruiting at such a high level, coaching at such a high level, pressing all the right buttons in game. Just remarkable. So yes, I do think it'll be Jon Scheyer cutting down the nets as a head coach this time.
You know, one of the conversations, I'll leave it with this, in talking with Coach Scheyer, I said to him leading up to that Elite Eight matchup, I said to him, you know, how do you do the balancing act when you follow a legend like Coach K, who you still have a relationship with, who still has a firm grip of his fastball, but doesn't loom and linger over the program, allows you to be you? When do you go back and forth on, hey, my inexperience is in this spot, maybe it's a blind spot. Do I go to coach with this, or do I not go to coach because it's my program now? And he goes, it's really simple. Coach K is always there for me if I need him, but I also know I need to figure some of this out on my own. And I think it's safe to say, Nicole, at this point, Coach Jon Scheyer's got it figured out. This guy has got some really big things in front of him. I agree with you. I do see it being Duke and Florida. These 2 teams, especially down the stretch, have been the 2 best teams to me with the most talent. But Duke is just – I don't know if it's because I just watched them in Newark. I just don't see anybody beating this team. They're not the team I picked in my bracket. But in my readjusted bracket, give me the Duke Blue Devils to win the championship here. Their 6th national title. I'd be surprised if they don't cut down the nets, Nicole.
I agree. I did have them. I did have the faith in them. We're not going to talk about the rest of the bracket, but I had the champion correct.
Well, that's a perfect place to end it. We started by singing the praises of Nicole, nailing this on how it'd be chalky. Perfect place to end it. She said Duke would be the champion. Will they prove her to be right? For Nicole, I'm Jordan. Thanks for listening, everybody, and enjoy Final Four weekend and the eventual crowning of a champion.